Welcome to Disconnected, and who better to talk about climate change than GB News and Neil Oliver. Let's see what they have to say.
Neil Oliver is tonight's outsider. So move over COVID. The elites are back with another terror campaign to scare you witless. Oh, this time it's the end of civilization. A new climate change report from the UN today warns time is running out for humanity to avoid a dangerous global warming catastrophe. The update from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we're a, quote, ticking time bomb skating on thin ice unless we stop burning fossil fuels. The UN is now calling on countries like the UK to, quote, fast forward the deranged march to net zero by 10 years to 2040, regardless of how cold or skint it leaves us. Now, for the record,
I like how people who go down this route don't want us to be cold and skint now, but dead in I don't know how many years, or no future for the planet after a couple of generations. How they think that we shouldn't, take a little bit of a hit now to ensure a certain amount of safety down the road for everyone that comes after us. What I also don't understand is here's Mr. Slick Hair and Mr. Neil Oliver, who's such an, in my opinion, just such a moron. They are disputing all the scientific research that is been done about climate change that the UN then goes and makes their, recommendations about. They know better.
The UK has already cut its greenhouse gases by more than 40% over recent decades.
Which is an absolute big fat effing lie. What happened in the UK is why they say that, and there's enough videos about for people who don't believe this or don't understand this properly, is that the UK itself, its own emissions have been cut a lot, but that is because they took everything that they did, which was dirty, and they gave it to somebody else to deal with, like especially things like waste, e-waste, things like that. And it also actually shows that we don't manufacture anything anymore, because if we did manufacture, we would still have a high carbon footprint. So we offset everything to somewhere else. We still get the benefit of it. We still pay for it. We still basically are managing it. We're just doing it in another country. And therefore, we can then ourselves say in the UK, oh, look, we have, lowered our emissions by this and this much, which is, they've just moved it. They've not made it less.
And we're responsible for less than 1% of global emissions. So, Neil Oliver, when people like Greta Thunberg, make similar doomsday claims, like this now deleted tweet from 2018, where she said, a top climate scientist is warning climate change will wipe out all of humanity unless we stop.
To be fair, this doesn't help the kind of, the activists, the extreme activists about climate change at all when they make these massively over-elaborate claims. Because let's say this is not true, or even remotely true, or even just a little bit true. It doesn't really matter. The point is that because we're still here in 2023, and she's posted this in 2018, suddenly makes out as if everything that she said is bullshit. When, obviously it isn't. We're kind of like, well, things might be going a little bit slower, or maybe there's other reasons, but the point is we're kind of still in trouble. But because they post this extraordinary stuff, it then gives, those non-believers kind of ammunition.
Stop using fossil fuels over the next 5 years. Neil, given we're still here, still hearing the same rubbish from the UN, how are we expected to take any of this seriously?
Well, we mustn't take any of it seriously, Dan. I think most importantly of all, we should notice where we're...
Don't ever take agreed upon scientific research seriously. That's the worst thing you could do. I mean, come on. It's not even a real statement.
Being nudged, and more than anything else, perhaps, we should notice the wider context. Look at what you've already been talking about tonight. the whole Partygate thing, whether or not they had cake or not, was not the point. The point was that they weren't scared when they all colluded, Labour and Tory, to scare their constituents into.
Yeah. See here, this is kind of why I started this channel in the first place, because this is where I hope that most people see through, because this is a case where on the one side they kind of completely reject one thing that is definitely an issue, something that we really should be worried about. Then they say they say things that are absolutely not true, but then within that there's also certain things which are true. And so there's never really everybody that comes together with around a certain subject and kind of grip on, because the next piece, you can't really disagree with a lot of this. There is definitely this problem with governments and their PR trying to sidestep one thing by focusing on something else, or by trying to get everybody worried about, the other thing, so that we don't pay attention to the other thing that's going on.
Obedience, that was the whole point. You've already talked about how the SNP is imploding. That's a significant political story. People are increasingly suspicious, it wasn't on your show tonight, but about the real motivations for the war in Ukraine that's immiserating millions of people in that country. It's all going on. There's a great deal going on that people are rightly watching. And what happens? The IPCC gets pushed on stage yet again by the UN. They come clattering on stage to distract everybody from the real world issues. This millennium.
These are all important issues. The war in Ukraine is a massively important issue. Our survival on this planet is an important issue. World hunger is an important issue. Climate change, the banking crisis, these are all important issues. There's only so much that you can actually highlight constantly at the same time, to be fair.
The Aryan concept of the end of the world has been used to frighten people for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You've got to pay attention not to what's being said, but to when it's being said. That is the important point. People are noticing all sorts. The banks are getting shaky all over the world. People are worried about leaving their savings in the bank. People have cost of lockdown crisis to deal with. There's all sorts of stuff going
cost of fucking Brexit crisis to deal with
on, and a floundering establishment out there thinks, right, how do we get people looking the other way while we seek to deal or not deal with whatever it is we've got going on? Oh yes, we'll tell them it's the end of the world. The virus, COVID, was invisible. What else can we threaten them with that they can't see or do anything about? I know. We'll bring back on climate change and tell them it's the end of the world.
Totally. You're so right, Neil. But why do you think the media just laps this up? I mean, tonight, for research purposes, before I tuned into Jubes & Co, I had a look at how the BBC News at 6, the ITV News at 6:30 was covering this story. I mean, they might as well be the propaganda arm of the United Nations. It feels like they actually get off on trying to scare.
So is the BBC the what's the word? Propaganda machine for the Tories now, or is it now for the UN? Because if you think about it, the BBC is now pretty much been proven to be like the mouthpiece of the Tories, having 4 prominent ex-Tory members and people who have close ties with the Tories and have donated millions to the Tories in the BBC. And the Tories are the last people who give 2 shits about climate change. So this makes no sense, saying this, that the UN, that the BBC is a mouthpiece for the UN. If anything, I can imagine Mr. Rich Bankers sitting in the BBC going, oh, no, we shouldn't be posting this because we don't want people to, stop buying stuff.
Scare British people. Now, they're addicted to it, Neil. What's that about?
Journalism, media, it has an existential crisis going on. You and I have both been in the business of journalism for decades. It's not what it was. No, the motivations behind journalism are not what they once were. That appetite for digging down, finding the truth, getting up in people's faces, asking difficult questions, that's gone. The media.
So classic, right? So on the one hand, they say something which is entirely correct. So we have this problem where nearly every news outlet now is basically part of a political faction or ideology, and they either spin or selectively report or have a certain bias, some more so than others, and there's very little reporting, which is just, you know what, guys, here's the truth, and we dug as deep as we could, and here's all the facts that we could find, with no bias, no slant, no angle, other than just here's the information. Yet how hypocritical is it for these two to say that thing? Because, I mean, what else is GB News but a right-wing mouthpiece for crazy shit, right? Especially Neil Oliver. Like, for him to say this, I mean, I remember he did this thing when he did the history stuff, and I'll never forget it. Always liked him. I always thought his programs really interesting, up until the point where he was doing the whole Jacobite thing, and he was saying that he was calling the Jacobite, the war, the Culloden battle, a civil war. A civil war. Right, crazy.
Yeah, journalists in the main are mouthpieces for vested interests.
Just like you are a mouthpiece for vested interest. Anyway, thank you very much. Comments below. Thank you very much. Take care.